Welcome back to another episode of Revealed Apologetics. I'm your host, Eli Ayala. Welcome to this episode that we're going to be talking about, I think, a very interesting topic. If you have taken note of the thumbnail, you will notice two individuals there. One who perhaps is recognizable to you if you're familiar with the realm of apologetics and well-known atheists and skeptics. And another gentleman, probably well-known within the realm of skepticism and atheism, but maybe not so much amongst Christians. I'm going to explain who these two individuals are, and then we'll dive into some principles that these two individuals have laid out that is often used by skeptics in dialogues with Christians and theists. Okay, so that's what we're going to be covering today. Now, before I get into that, I would like to welcome folks. If you are here for the first time, please do me a solid and subscribe to the channel so that you can get all of the updates and things that are going to be going on. As folks who have been listening to my channel thus far, I've been trying really hard to keep to the 2 live streams a week so I could have some level of consistency. And that means I've been doing some extra planning in terms of topics to cover. And so I've got a lot of interesting topics to cover, and I'm super excited about doing them. Also, I am almost on this channel, almost up to 10,000 subscribers, and so that is super exciting. I've been doing this for a few years, and growth can be rapid sometimes, and it can be rather slow at other times. But slow and steady wins the race, and so I'm super excited that almost at 10,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for everyone who has supported and continues to support by their viewing, by their donations, and just their prayers. All of those things are greatly appreciated. Now, I'm super excited for today because I've actually have been able to fix my microphone. Now, if you don't realize the difference, I was hearing kind of volume fluctuation. My computer was automatically lowering my mic, so it sounded really weird here. And if you know anything about me, apologetics is just about all that I do. I'm a teacher, of course, and I teach logic and Old Testament Bible. But when it comes to technology, I am completely and utterly useless. Okay, my camera the camera quality might look okay, right? But I don't know how to use my camera other than to do this kind of stuff. Okay, I literally turned my camera on. I got the 2 lights here. Lord knows if someone who knew what they were doing would come into my office, they'd try to fix this and fix that. Hey, you can do this a little better. I have no idea what I'm doing technologically. So there you go. I actually got good advice. If you look at my old videos, I was using a webcam. And then Mike Winger, who is a well-known Christian YouTuber, he gave me some advice. He says, hey, listen, what you need to do is you need to get a webcam link and get a DSLR camera and use a DSLR camera as your webcam. So it would change your quality. And once you do that, you're going to look at all your old videos. You're going to be like, oh my goodness, those were terrible. And so I took his advice. I got myself a webcam link and used a DSLR camera. I got a Canon T6i camera here. Nothing too fancy, but it looks much better. Other than that, I have no idea what I'm doing. So I'm so happy that I actually figured out how to fix my mic situation because it was really, really annoying. You guys probably noticed every time I talk, my hand is going down here to readjust the volume. So super, super excited about that. All right. Well, anyway, let's jump into our topic. Again, welcome if you're just joining in. My name is Eli Ayala of Revealed Apologetics. If you're interested in my content that goes beyond the YouTube channel here, you can check out my website. I have a blog, revealedapologetics.com, and you can find the videos there in a nicely organized fashion, along with some online courses that I sell that is used to support the channel, but I lay out in 2 courses that I've created. An introduction to biblical apologetics, which is kind of like an intermediate level. It's not completely an introduction, but it is introductory enough that if you want to get your feet wet in the topic, it will give you a sufficient amount of information throughout the course of 5 lectures. And then I created a part 2 called Precept Applied, where I actually apply presuppositionalism to a wide range of positions, like precept applied to atheism, precept applied to Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, the cults, things like that. And so if you're looking to support Revealed Apologetics, you can do that by purchasing one of those courses that's available on the website under Revealed Apologetics Precept U. and or you can donate by going to the donate page. All of that information is in the description of this video below. And so that's a great way to support what I'm doing. Helps me do a lot of the back end stuff in upholding a website and YouTube and things like that. Now, with all that out of the way, the two individuals that you see on the thumbnail, one gentleman is, I think he is no longer with us, okay, is a gentleman by the name of Arthur C. Clarke, and the other individual is Michael Shermer. Okay, most folks who are involved in apologetics or aware of apologetic debates, the name Michael Shermer should be familiar to you. Michael Shermer is a well-known skeptic. He's debated a lot of Christian apologists. I think he's debated Frank Turek and others, and you can find him online, YouTube, things like that. Okay, so let me walk us through who these individuals are. What are these principles that they've applied, that skeptics use these principles in discussions with Christians, and then we're going to navigate how we can approach it from a presuppositional perspective, okay? Now, someone's asking, how late am I to the show? I literally just started 6 minutes ago, so you're not that late, okay? So welcome. Now, that being said, if you have any questions throughout the course of what I'm doing here, I typically take questions towards the back end, but maybe if I get a little sidetracked and I see some questions flowing in, I'll take some time to kind of move aside and look at the comments, okay? Just be patient with me. I got to look in different directions, so I got to pay attention to the comment stream and then all the other things that I've got on my screen. So if I catch some questions, I will try my best to address them. The only thing I ask, as I always ask, is to preface your question with the word question so that I could differentiate it from the other comments in the comment thread. All right. So without further ado, let's take a look at the two gentlemen that are on my thumbnail. If you're not familiar, the first gentleman is someone by the name of Arthur C. Clarke. Okay. And the other gentleman is, I think the one with the kind of the bluish hue in his face. That's the image I found. I thought was kind of cool looking, so I used it on the thumbnail. That's Michael Shermer. And these are two influential figures in science and skepticism, and they're each known for their respective contributions in different areas. But with respect to this video, they are known for development of certain laws or principles that are often used in conversations between skeptics and theists. Okay, but a lot of their principles that they've discussed often come up in conversations relating to things like technology, science fiction, and atheism. And so there's kind of a broad application and then a specific application with respect to how many skeptics will use the principles I'm going to lay out in their dialogues with Christians and other kinds of theists. Okay, so Arthur Clarke, I think he passed away in 2008, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, he was a British science fiction writer, a futurist and inventor, and he's best known for, and this many people will be familiar with this. He's known for his most famous work. I think it's his most famous work is the 2001 A Space Odyssey. Okay, so 2001 Space Odyssey, that's associated with Arthur C. Clarke. That should be familiar to some folks. He's also well known for his speculative ideas about the future of technology and space exploration. Clarke's contributions to science fiction shaped a lot of popular conceptions of advanced technology and space travel and things like that. And he's widely regarded as a visionary in predicting the rise of technologies that were at the time far beyond human capabilities, okay? So a lot of people kind of appreciate his contributions in those areas, okay? Now, one of his famous speculative ideas that we're going to be discussing here is what is known as Clarke's third law, okay? And so I want to kind of slow down to make sure that that you will understand what this third law is, and then just by stating it, you will see why it's often used in discussions between Christians or theists and atheists and things like that. Okay, so Clarke's law states any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Okay, and this law was published in Clarke's essay collection called The Profiles of the Future. I think it was published in 1962. And Clarke's intention with this law was to pretty much highlight the idea that as technology advances to a certain point, right, it becomes so advanced that those unfamiliar with it, right, or with lesser technological experience would perceive it as magic. And so the idea is grounded in Clarke's broader fascination with progression of human innovation and the seemingly limitless potential of technological advancement. Of course, in an age of science and advancement, that obviously makes a lot of sense, right? The technology is moving so quickly. So I kind of understand kind of the context, or rather the interest in his views with respect to that topic. Okay. Now, Clarke's law reflects the perspective that technological developments might eventually achieve such sophistication that people from less advanced societies or even less advanced eras in human history would see them as supernatural or magical. So, for example, to a medieval peasant, right, a smartphone might look like a magical device because they lack the framework to understand its technological details and how it works. And so Clarke was exploring the human perception of technology, not necessarily from a religious or metaphysical standpoint, but from a kind of futuristic, speculative standpoint. Although his principle has been applied to discussions on religion and things like that. Okay, and so that's Arthur C. Clarke. If you're interested in kind of the background of who he is and his various contributions, you can look him up, and I'm sure there is lots of information that's available online with respect to who he is. Now, our second individual. Pardon, let me grab my water here. Our second individual is probably much more well known in the skeptic community, okay, and that is a gentleman by the name of Michael Shermer. Okay, Michael Shermer. Now, Michael Shermer is an American science writer, a historian of science, and he's the founder of the Skeptics Society. So if you're interested in finding out more about who he is, you can check him out. He's the author and founder of the Skeptics Society. You can type in his name, Skeptics Society. There's going to be lots of information you could find on Michael Shermer. And he's known for his work in promoting skepticism, okay, promoting science education, and of course promoting like atheism and things like that. And he often focuses on debunking religious and paranormal claims and pseudoscientific issues that he thinks are worthy of debunking, okay. And as a Christian who is concerned with the truth, I appreciate that, although I disagree with his, his positions against Christianity, obviously, right? So Shermer, again, has written quite extensively on why people believe in gods from his perspective, right? And, why people believe in various supernatural phenomena, okay? And he often attributes these beliefs to kind of a psychological or various social factors rather than there actually being a god. And so one of the things that I find interesting about Shermer is that a lot of his critiques often involve kind of an attempted psychoanalysis of Christians or religious people, which, from an apologetic standpoint or from a worldview standpoint, I don't really think that's at all very convincing, because you can kind of reverse that and turn that around. So it's but again, some people use that approach, and of course he's got other material out there that perhaps would be more of a stronger attempt to engage theism than just psychoanalysis. Okay, and so Shermer is also known for what is known as Shermer's last law, which states, and here is Shermer's law, which is slightly different than Clarke's law. So you want to pay attention to this. Okay, Shermer's law states that any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial intelligence is indistinguishable from God. Okay? Any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial intelligence is indistinguishable from God. Okay? And so now Shermer's law, as opposed to Clarke's law, builds on the same line of reasoning as Clarke's third law, as I stated before, but shifts the focus from technology to intelligence. And so Shermer is suggesting that if humans were to encounter an extraterrestrial species far more advanced than we are, especially in terms of like intellect or power, we might mistake them for gods. And so the context here is firmly rooted in Shermer's skepticism. Okay, there is a connection here toward the existence of God, positing that belief in deities could be reduced to misunderstandings or misinterpretations of various phenomena that have, from his perspective, a natural explanation. Okay, and so Shermer's law is particularly aimed at religious beliefs specifically, implying that what people attribute to divine causes might just be the result of advanced beings or systems that we don't yet comprehend. Okay. So let's summarize this real quick, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the details. All right. So Arthur Clarke's law, okay, focuses on technological advancement and how it can be perceived as magic by less advanced civilizations. And Shermer's law deals with extraterrestrial intelligence and suggests that super intelligent beings could be mistaken for gods, right? Thus reinforcing this kind of naturalistic, atheistic view of the world where we're skeptical of things that appear to be of divine origin, okay? And pretty much both of these principles, these laws, challenge the idea that what seems supernatural must be divine, right? Suggesting instead that it might simply be, like you said before, advanced technology or intelligence, something that's beyond human understanding. Okay. Now, within the context of apologetics, these principles or these laws, okay, they are often used by many skeptics to kind of challenge the attempt of the theist to kind of posit, evidence for miracles and things like that. Okay. Now, how would we approach something like that? And that's what I want to dive into now that we kind of just stated all of this. Okay. So if you're just hopping in, what are we going to be discussing today? Clarke's law, Shermer's law, how skeptics use it, and how we could approach it from a presuppositional perspective. Okay, because I think that behind these principles are baked into assumptions and presuppositions of a particular worldview that, as Christians, we reject at the outset. Okay, so you're going to see in reality that these attempted explanations or challenges that they attempt to come from kind of a neutral and objective perspective, and such that if we're neutral, then we're taking in this information. Well, how would we know, right? It's coming from a foundation of skepticism, which of course the Christian is going to reject a priori, just as the skeptic rejects a priori the claims of the Christian faith, especially the specific claims with respect to the innate knowledge of God that the Bible asserts that all men have. Okay, so that's kind of the direction I'm going to go. And if I have time, actually, you know what? Let me take a quick look at the comments. I'll see here, and maybe we can take a couple of questions and comments from folks, and then I'll just jump right into our topic here. Why don't you guys let me know in the comments? Do you prefer that I go through my content and address the questions at the end, or do you prefer that I address questions throughout? Okay, maybe you guys can give me like a quick, prefer, in the middle or something like that, or prefer at the end. I care about that because I want to make sure that I answer your questions as best as I can. Okay, so let me just go through these real quick, and then I'll try my best throughout the rest of the stream to catch them while I'm kind of giving my spiel here. Okay, so Jackie Griffith says, Revealed Apologetics, as there are many worldviews concerning this area, would you consider doing a live on mental health from a Christian presuppositional apologetics point of view? It's an interesting question, Jackie. I've never really thought about doing something like that. Let me look into that and see if there is some application that can be made that warrants a live stream. Thank you for that suggestion. I'll totally look into that. Thanks. All right, let's see here. No, just say go. G.A. Norberg says no. Advanced technology operates within natural laws. That is correct. While miracles transcend and override them, making the two fundamentally distinct. They are definitely fundamentally distinct. So yes, I would agree with some small caveats on the side. Okay. G.A. Norberg also says it would be great if you can do something on physicalism, maybe even have a guest on. Yeah, I could do that. As a matter of fact, I've just recently been studying issues of physicalism and different forms of dualism, property dualism, all that kind of jazz. So yeah, I definitely would be interested in doing something like that. So yeah, thanks for the suggestion. I appreciate it. Let's see here. Mighty Zarlak. When will we see our friend in the chat telling us to donate? Well, you missed it. I asked for donations at the beginning of the show, so you missed that part. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you missed it. Sorry, Mighty Zarlak. All right. Let's see here. Some comments here, not so many questions, which is fine because we just got started. All right. Okay, so thank you, Mighty Zarlak. I appreciate it. He says, Eli, I don't want to interrupt your stream, and I appreciate that. Thank you. But sometimes it's easier to address questions during the time you are talking about that topic. Yes, so that's definitely helpful for me to know. Here's the challenge. If I answer questions in the middle, then I have to answer them quickly, because if it takes up the core of the time, then it's going to take me longer to get through the content that I'm wanting to get to. So there's a balance there, but I really do appreciate it. I will try to consider that when a question comes up and I catch it on the questions, the comments, I will try to address it as best I can. Okay. Let's see here. Frank Odom says, I've heard the word a priori. What does this mean? A priori refers to something that comes before. So if you believe something a priori, you believe it beforehand, right? It's kind of like a presupposition or an assumption that it comes before other things, okay? So a priori means something along those lines. There's a technical definition, of course, but that's my kind of quick thought, okay? All right. Okay, good. So I think I got everyone there. All right. So let's take a look. We're dealing with Clarke's law and Shermer's law. Okay. Now, let's kind of rehash here. So Clarke's law says any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And then again, we've got Shermer's law, which goes that one step further. Any sufficiently technologically advanced beings are indistinguishable from gods. Now, on the surface, that kind of sounds like, oh, that's actually very interesting. How would we deal with that? Okay. And I think that's a fair question. It's an interesting kind of approach in terms of explaining, this issue of what is the difference between the divine and something that's advanced. Okay. And so these principles, these laws, as they're called, they seem to suggest that there is no difference between what looks like magic or divinity and what might just really be sophisticated technology. Okay. But here's where we hit the first issue. Both of these so-called laws. Okay, and I'm talking to Christians here, right? Again, I'm not talking to the atheist here. I mean, you can say what you want. I know there are going to be people's like, yeah, whatever. But you have to understand that these principles, these so-called laws, they presuppose a particular worldview. Okay, and this is why we always harp over the issue of not the fact that there is no neutrality, right? When these skeptics, they approach the topic as though they're looking at things objectively, they're not. When you dig under the surface of the skeptic, there are commitments that at the very beginning, a priori, are antithetical to your Christian presuppositions. So you have Christian presuppositions, you have non-Christian presuppositions. You can't avoid that because everyone is coming from a worldview perspective. Okay, and so these so-called laws, okay, Clarke's law, Shermer's law, they presuppose a worldview at the very beginning that is in direct conflict with the Christian worldview. And so when you realize that, you see really where the issues are going to come to bear. Okay, so here's something important. Okay, there's no such thing as neutral ground. You need to get that into your noggin. That's a basic point of presuppositional apologetics. We point this out because it's true. Okay, Clarke and Shermer are not just making a technological or scientific statement when they assert their laws, okay, or when someone asserts those principles. They're implicitly assuming an epistemology that is a theory of knowledge, if you don't know what epistemology is, that is completely detached from a biblical view of reality. It is detached from a biblical metaphysic, and it's detached from a biblical epistemology. So when someone makes assertions about what is possible or impossible, or what is distinguishable or not distinguishable, that presupposes metaphysical and epistemological commitments that the Christian is going to disagree with. And so this is why we talk about worldview, all right? The atheist and the skeptics complain, well, just give me the evidence. Well, dude, you don't understand, and we keep repeating ourselves. The issue is not the evidence. The issue is the interpretation of the evidence. It is the presuppositions that we bring to the evidence. And so, as Van Til has said in his writings, he says that I don't mind talking about the evidence, right? Van Til says, but we can't go on and on about evidence without talking about the philosophy of evidence, or we can't go on and on about the facts without first addressing the philosophy of fact, because it is the very philosophy of fact that is the reason why we are disagreeing over how to interpret the facts. Okay, so when people make assert these principles, we need to be self-conscious of our presuppositions, and we need to make the skeptic aware that they have presuppositions as well. Now, some more informed and philosophically sophisticated skeptics will be aware of their presuppositions, but that's not the case with everyone. Okay, we want to be, as Van Til has said, we want to be epistemologically self-conscious. We want to be aware of our theory of knowledge, our theory of reality, our ethical theory, and how those all fit together. Okay, and we're always in touch with that background music, those presuppositions, while we're interacting with the skeptic and while we're examining principles such as the ones we've laid out. Okay, for Clark and Shermer's laws, okay, are only compelling because they are compelling to many people. Skeptics use it, they find it convincing, they think it's a good approach when talking to Christians and theists, right? The laws are only compelling if you already assume a worldview where there's no sovereign God, no revelation, and where human reasoning stands as the ultimate authority, right? Because they're not relying on God, because they're saying, well, how do you even distinguish if it's a God or a natural cause? So God is not a necessary foundation in that perspective. Something else is the ultimate foundation, and it's going to be the self-sufficiency of human reason, which is a form of autonomy. Okay? In other words, these laws, these Clark's law and let me see. I'm reading a comment here. Yes, thank you, Mighty Zarlak. I agree with that, right? That's true. If you set up your model with a specific metaphysics, then your conclusion will be different. Yes, that's right. And your metaphysic will necessarily impact your epistemology and vice versa. When you engage in epistemology, a theory of knowledge, that assumes reality is a certain way. So an epistemology assumes a metaphysic, and a metaphysic also assumes an epistemology. Okay? So thank you for acknowledging that point. I really appreciate that. Okay? Now, so these principles that I've laid out, they assume a neutral position. They do not assume God as a necessary starting point for intelligibility and knowledge. And now, apart from the fact as to whether the Christian worldview is true or not, that's not what I'm talking about. When you assert those principles, it already a priori leaves out the possibility of the truth of the Christian worldview, because the truth of the Christian worldview is predicated not on that assumption. Okay? So from a Christian perspective, our knowledge is rooted in the fear of the Lord, Proverbs 1:7, all throughout Proverbs and Scripture. Our worldview as Christians, we argue, and we've argued, I'm not going to argue here, it's not the topic of this video, I've argued elsewhere. Okay? Our worldview as Christians, we argue, provide the preconditions necessary for knowledge itself, necessary for logic, morality, and science, and all these sorts of things. And that's why we can distinguish between magic, technology, and God. But let's walk through this step by step. Okay? So let's take a look at Clark's law real quick. All right? Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And so the idea here is that if a technology is advanced enough, it's going to appear as magic to the person who doesn't understand it. And so think about how someone from, as I used the example before, someone from the Middle Ages might react to seeing a smartphone, right? They'd probably think it's sorcery, right? But here's the problem. Just because something is beyond our current understanding doesn't mean it's indistinguishable from magic. Why? Well, because magic and technology operate on entirely different principles. Right? We have to define our terms. What do we mean by these terms too? That's important as well. Magic is often defined as the manipulation of forces that violate natural laws, while technology works within those natural laws. It might push the boundaries, to be sure, right? But it never violates those, okay, from when you're dealing with kind of something pertaining to science. So from a Christian worldview, where we affirm the consistency of natural laws grounded in God's character, we can see the difference between what is merely advanced technology and what is a suspension or violation of those laws. And so Clark's law fails because it blurs categories that are fundamentally distinct. There's a reason we don't confuse sleight of hand with scientific breakthroughs. Technology is repeatable, it's testable, it's rational, while magic, if it existed in the way that it's traditionally understood, would be none of those things. Okay? But here's the kicker. Within Clark's law is an underlying skepticism. It assumes that given enough advancement, we could never truly know what something is, whether it's technology or magic. And so this leads to an epistemological confusion, as I understand it. The Christian worldview doesn't do that, as we would argue, okay? Because God has made the world intelligible, and he's revealed himself through creation and scripture, and we can trust that what we observe through science is not irrational magic. There is a distinct order, a purpose, there's design behind everything, and as Romans 1 tells us, right? Romans 1:20 tells us, talking about the, God has revealed himself and so forth. We don't fall into that same problem of skepticism. By the way, this idea, not being able to distinguish between magic and the divine, already assumes that knowledge of God is mediate. That is to say, that knowledge of God is derived from looking and seeing and concluding. But that is not the Christian worldview. For as I've argued elsewhere, knowledge of God is innate. Knowledge of God is something that you have because you are image of God. Whether you verbally affirm God or deny God, the knowledge of God is inescapable. That is what the Christian position is. Whether you believe that to be true is another story. Whether we can demonstrate as Christians, that's another issue. I've dealt with that in another video. Okay? But the point is that given our position, the principles that are laid out presuppose the falsity of that position without demonstrating it. Okay? So that's where we would have a problem with someone who asserts Clarke's law. It just doesn't work because it assumes a neutrality that doesn't exist, and it assumes the falsity of the Christian worldview. At least it might apply to other perspectives that believe in a divine and that the knowledge of that divine is a looking and seeing and concluding. But that doesn't work against a worldview that is inherently based upon a principle that the knowledge of God is innate. It's just a different perspective there. Okay, all right. Now let's move on to Shermer's law, okay? Let me see if there's any new questions here. Let's see here. Are there any new questions? Okay, no, nothing new. That's fine. Let me see here. All right, be nice, be nice. Yep, neutrality is a myth. Yeah. All right. All right, well, let's move on to Shermer's law. Okay, now Shermer's law states, let's kind of review it real quick so you're following along. Shermer's law states that any sufficiently technologically advanced beings are indistinguishable from gods. Okay, and so Shermer here takes Clarke's idea one step further and applies the same principle to deities. Okay, and so he suggests that beings with sufficiently advanced technology, like aliens or something, right? We use aliens, for example, could be confused with gods. But again, here's the problem with that, right? And this is what a lot of people mistake. If you're going to do a critique of the Christian worldview or offer kind of a skeptical argument to show, well, you have no way of distinguishing one, but what often skeptics do, okay, is they blur, this is for Christians now, if you know these categories, they blur what we call the creator-creature distinction, okay? From within the Christian worldview, God is not just a being with more power or knowledge than we have. From the Christian perspective, God is categorically different. There is a distinction between the creator and the creature. Okay, God is the creator. He is not just bigger or a better version of us. Okay, he's infinite. He's self-existent. He's omnipotent. He's omniscient, right? And no amount of technological advancement could ever bridge the gap between a finite creature and the infinite creator. You see, Shermer's law relies on a faulty understanding of what God is when applied to the Christian worldview specifically. It treats God as though he's simply one of many beings on a scale of power or knowledge, rather than recognizing that God is in a class of his own from within the Christian worldview. You don't have to believe that, but if you're going to critique the Christian worldview, you're going to have to, grant what we assert the Christian worldview is. Now, there are some Christians who don't share my perspective here with respect to like innate knowledge of God and things, but that leaves them open to these sorts of things, I think. Okay, but the presuppositionalist, reformed perspective that holds to this innate knowledge of God, which I think is a biblical principle, I think is immune to these types of criticisms. Okay, that doesn't mean that Christianity's true because of that. I think it's true, and I argue for that. That's not what I'm arguing here. I'm just saying that it's immune to what these principles are often used, these laws are often used in the context of discussions with Christian theists, specifically those of the presuppositional stripe. Okay? Now, think about this, though. Shermer's law implicitly suggests, and I mentioned this before just a moment ago, that our knowledge of God is purely empirical or experiential. But as Christians, we understand that we know God because why? What is the Christian worldview based on? It's based upon the idea that God has revealed himself to us. The all-powerful God is able to reveal himself such that he can make himself known and distinguishable from technology or aliens. right? So we know God not because we've encountered some super advanced being. There's no possibility of confusing the true God with some other being, right? Because God's revelation is clear from within the Christian worldview. It's objective. It's unmistakable. Okay. Now, if you think, well, how would you know, right? That how would you know perspective already presupposes that we don't know God innately and that we have to use our own reason independently from relying on God to reach various conclusions. But what have we been arguing like for forever on this channel? God is the necessary precondition for knowledge and intelligibility. And so in that case, we must start with him to have meaning and intelligibility for anything else that we might conclude. And so we start with him in that sense. We're not operating independently of him and then reaching a conclusion, okay, based upon some observation. That's not what we're arguing. He has made himself known. He's made himself evident within us, okay? And so that knowledge that man has from a biblical perspective is innate. It's not something that is mediated, a looking and seeing and then concluding, okay? And so again, those are some important things to keep in mind. So now both Clarke's law, and Shermer's law really rest on an assumption that we can't really know anything for sure. Because if it's true that we can't distinguish between, then how can we come to knowledge about anything? We can just say, well, this can be a natural cause, this can be a divine cause. I guess we can never know, right? If technology is indistinguishable from magic and sufficiently advanced beings are indistinguishable from gods, then we're really left in a sea of epistemological skepticism at that point. But here's the thing. Skepticism, at least of that sort, is self-defeating. If you're skeptical about everything, then you can't even be sure of your own skepticism. So this isn't a great place to start. It starts a priori, contrary to the Christian worldview that it's often used to critique, and it engages in a kind of reasoning that is not really giving due credence to a proper internal critique of the Christian worldview. Okay. Now, in the Christian worldview, we argue that the Christian worldview provides a firm foundation for knowledge. We don't need to worry that our senses or our reasoning will lead us astray in such a way that we can't know the difference between a machine and a miracle. Okay, between a superpowered alien and the Almighty God. Right. That's because we start from God. We start that he has spoke with the idea that he has spoken, that he's revealed his truth, and it's upon that basis that gives us the proper foundation for making sense out of anything else, and hence the transcendental thrust to the way we, at least presuppositionalists, tend to argue. Okay, God is not a conclusion that we reason to; we reason from God, because if we don't reason from God, we would not be able to reach any conclusions at all. Because conclusions cannot be reached via an autonomous and neutral process. Okay, how do we know this? We could argue it, not the topic of this video here, but you can argue that the history of philosophy shows that when you reject divine revelation, there are issues that arise metaphysically and epistemologically that you need to answer. Now, if you're a skeptic watching this, you might think that you have answers to those, and that's great, but if those are going to have to be hashed out in actual discussion and debate and dialogue. Okay? All right. So when someone brings up Clarke's law or Shermer's law, okay, you don't need to get all bent out of shape if you're a Christian. It's like, well, what am I going to do? You need to know your worldview. You need to know what the Bible teaches. You need to know what the Bible teaches with respect to the knowledge of God. You need to recognize that there is no neutrality. Okay? These basic principles that are grounded in scriptural teaching, I think, are sufficient for the Christian to be able to engage in responding to comments that involve these kinds of principles that many skeptics tend to use. Again, not all skeptics use them. I think many skeptics, I think philosophically informed skeptics would recognize that these principles aren't really the best place to start, and I very much appreciate that. Okay? There are better ways. For example, if I were to give advice to the skeptics who want to engage Christians, okay, and engage in the Christian worldview, there are better places to start that I think would be more fruitful. This, again, I think is just based on faulty assumptions, okay? So what you want to do when you hear people use these principles or you want to be able to peel the layers. What is the person assuming when they state this principle? And when you peel back the layer, okay, from the atheist or the agnostic or the skeptic or whoever, you will find lurking under the layer metaphysical and epistemological commitments that have not been justified yet, and then you're going to have to say, well, wait a minute, you want to challenge those foundations. And again, Christians can be guilty of this as well. Okay, Christians can, when you peel back the layers of a Christian assertion, there's going to be a metaphysic and epistemology under that. And of course, that's why I encourage the Christian that you need to be aware of those foundations and be able to address them when they come up in discussion. All right. All right. So when someone brings up Clark's law or Shermer's law, don't get all bent out of shape. These aren't scientific discoveries. They're not like the law of gravity or something like that. They're philosophical statements based on a secular worldview that assumes human reason is the final authority. As Christians, we reject that a priori, just as those principles themselves reject a priori that everything relies on a foundation of God. Okay? And so within the biblical worldview, we know the difference between magic and technology, between creatures and the creator, because God has made his truth known. If God is all-powerful, he is able to make his truth known, such that it is distinguishable from the things apparently that the skeptics are saying are not, that we can't distinguish between, okay? And so ultimately, these laws really aren't laws. They fall apart when you look at the presuppositions behind them, right? They're based on a worldview that leads to skepticism. The Christian worldview, we argue, provide clarity, and it gives us the sufficient mechanisms to ascertain truth and intelligibility and knowledge, okay? And so that's how we could equip ourselves to respond when skeptics use these, okay? Don't let these kind of philosophical sound bites throw you off. When we evaluate them through the lens of biblical revelation, I think we can survive the critique and offer, I think, a critique by way of exposing that those principles are not based off objective principles and things like that, but they're actually based upon assumptions that are not neutral. And I would even argue, if you dig deep enough, they're self-refuting. All right, so I'm going to see the chat here, see if there are some questions that I could address. Okay, I apologize here. I don't want to rehash something that, and I'm going to get to real questions. So if there's any insults or, people trying to get dig-ins, I'm just not going to address them because, quite frankly, I've had a long day. So I don't really, sometimes I'll take something and, mess around with a comment and entertain it for a while. But I just want to get to some genuine questions as I see them here. All right, let's see here. Give me a quick moment so that I can find it. Yeah, so Mighty Zarlak, not a question, but he says, I guess we would have to define miracle like winning the lottery or something that never happens. Yeah, so I think it's important that we define miracle. I don't take a miracle to be a violation of laws, as though God created laws and stands back and lets things run on its own, and then he's kind of just tinkering. I don't think that that's a biblical conception of a miracle. I think that God is completely sovereign and he's governing the world in regular patterns, right? He has a normal way he governs the world, and I think a miracle is just a less normal way of God's governance. Okay, and in that sense, whether it's just providence and regularity, God is just as much in control of that as he is with when he performs a miracle and shows us a less normal and regular way that he governs the world. I don't think that he creates these laws, lets them run, and every now and then he kind of just tinkers with them. I think that's more in line of more of a deistic conception of God. So I wouldn't hold to that. So that's how I would define a miracle. And that definition is not at all weird or, abnormal. You can find that definition in a basic, Christian systematic theology. And take a look at something like a Wayne Grudem systematic theology. There's a whole chapter on miracles in which he defines it in a very similar way that I've just expressed here. So there you go. Let's see here. Okay. Trying again, just looking for anything that is prefaced with question. Okay. Let's see here. What does that mean? That'll twerk, or is that'll work? I mean, hopefully that was a mistake. I'm not twerking on this show here. Thank you for the clarification definition of a priori. You're welcome. Okay, let's see. Okay, so Jonathan Myron asks, when does debating become personal? Is there a line where debating starts attacking the person instead of their beliefs? Yeah, so this happens often, right? I mean, this is, again, I teach logic. We go through this quite frequently. That's just an ad hominem. So an ad hominem is a fallacy in which you attack a person rather than attacking their argument, right? There is a sense in which debates get personal. I don't think they always are intentionally, attacking the person. I think some people are not aware of the fallacies that they're engaging in because of the importance of the topic. People can be very passionate, and so you'll get a shift sometimes between defending a view or attacking a view and then attacking a person. And that's really just an issue of just having your emotions under control, right? As Christians, and I think as individuals, non-Christians would most likely, they should agree with this, I hope, right? When you're debating a topic, okay, we're not hating on the person, at least we shouldn't, okay? We should address their actual arguments and their positions. And when we do that, there's no need to connect the person with what they're saying, okay? As a Christian, we're to show love and respect to those that we're talking with, even though we are attempting to refute what they're saying. For example, our good friend Nick Jones, who is, I think he's an atheist. He comments a lot on my channel. He often accuses me of being disingenuous. I get accused of, I'm just in this for the money because I'm so rich. People can say that. I don't hate those people. When people say those things, I don't hate them. I disagree with them, and I take an opportunity to respond when I can or when it's appropriate. I don't hate them. My job is to either ignore comments or questions or debates that I don't think will be fruitful. So, for example, there are some people who ask a question or make a comment in such a way that I get the impression that even if I were to give the energy and responding, it's probably going to fall on deaf ears, because you can kind of get a feel for that based upon the nature of how someone is arguing or how they're writing out a comment or whatever. So you have to pick and choose. But yeah, things can get personal, and we all can fall victim to this. I think our job is to be clear-minded, think rationally, biblically, and when we're debating, just deal with the arguments. And when a person is attacking you, you have a choice. You can say, hey, I think this is getting a little out of hand. I think we're done here. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's no rule that says you have to continue debating someone who is attacking your person, right? There's no obligation for doing that, okay? However, you could also say, you know what? I'm going to still attack the arguments. I'll let the opponent attack me, and we'll let the audience decide who's actually addressing the issue. And then, of course, you can trust the fact that, God will bless your words, God will bless your arguments, and God will use what you say to reach those that it needs to reach. You're always going to have someone who is not going to appreciate what you're going to say, but that's just the way that's just the way the cookie crumbles. You can't let that hold you back. So yeah, it can get personal, but you want to know when it does that is a fallacy when it's used in an argument. Okay, so there you go. Let's see here. Mighty Zarlak says, with the omni properties, do you think God can do what is logically possible or know what is logically knowable? Don't have to be an exhaustive answer because I don't want to derail. Thank you for your question. So with omni properties like omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, do you think God can do what is logically possible? Yes. So I think that God can do anything that is logically possible and is consistent with his nature. Okay, so for example, lying. God cannot lie because lying is inconsistent with his nature. So God is always going to do things that are consistent with his nature. And anything he can do that's logically possible, he can do, but something that is against his nature is not logically possible because it's contradictory to who he is. It's like saying, can God not be God? Well, the answer is no. Yeah, so hope that answers your question. That's my quick way. You said don't be exhausted. That's my quick way. You said, or know what is logically knowable. Yes, God can know anything that is logically knowable. Anything that is knowledge or something that can be known, God knows it. God fully knows himself, and he fully knows his creation. Okay? All right. Thank you for that question here. Did I not say do? Yeah, do. Okay, there we go. I did it. So Chris Lasala says, do you guys believe in healing and casting out demons occurring in our modern times? Well, Chris, we want to make a distinction between the idea that God can answer prayer and to heal someone. as opposed to kind of the gift of healing when we're talking about like the spiritual gifts. And that's a big topic that warrants an entire live stream in and of itself. And that's the issue of cessationism versus continuationism. Do these spiritual gifts, of which include the sign gifts and includes healing and stuff like that, is that something that is for the church today, or was that something that was only for, the early church period? Okay. Now, I'm not going to get into that discussion, but I do believe that God can heal in response to a prayer if it is his will to do so. Okay. I don't hold to the view that it is always God's will to heal. Okay. I think that there are some times that God wills that he withhold healing for whatever purpose that he may have for doing so. Okay. And casting out demons, yes, I do believe in demonic realities. This is part of the Christian worldview, right? I'm not ashamed to say that at all. Now, that doesn't mean I'm able to distinguish whether, someone is having a mental issue or whether they're genuinely possessed. That's going to be something that is based upon the Spirit of God, speaking to us in the sense that he is allowing us to recognize when something is demonic and so forth. So there are supernatural means that God could equip his people to discern what those are. But I do believe that those are possible. I do think that demonic possession is an actual thing and is still prevalent today. But are the spiritual gifts and the sign gifts still for the church today? That's a different question. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Apologetics. Apologetics says, I accuse Eli of being very genuine. Yeah, I appreciate that. Why do I have to be disingenuous? I always tell people this, like when someone's like, you're so disingenuous, is it possible that I just actually believe the things that I'm saying, right? Just because you don't believe them and you can't see how I can believe them doesn't mean I'm not being genuine when I make an assertion or I try to make an argument or make a comment or whatever. I mean, you just assume, wow, that's so silly that he can't possibly be genuine. He must be disingenuous. Yeah. So there you go. That's why when people say, you're just so disingenuous, I just ignore it. It's like, if I say, no, I'm not disingenuous, person's not going to change their mind. So what's the point, right? I'll just talk to the people who think I'm being genuine, and hopefully we can, have a fruitful discussion or dialogue or whatever. So let's see here. Let's see here. Still looking. Sorry if I skipped anything. I don't mean to skip. Okay, Chris Lasala says, are you guys reformed? Yes, so I am reformed, and by that I do mean that I am a 5-point Calvinist. There's a lot of live streams and episodes that I've done on this show that cover topics relating to free will and those sorts of things. I actually, speaking of Calvinism and all that kind of stuff, I actually was planning. We'll see if I can get done kind of doing some prep. But I think I'm going to do a live stream on the topic of Molinism. And libertarian free will and those sorts of things. So I will try to put out some comments. I know folks do find those discussions and things like that very interesting. So yeah. So I'll try to do topics relating to that. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Aseric, I love that image there, Skeletor, man. I used to watch He-Man like a boss when I was a kid. I used to have the plastic sword, and you press the button, and you have the voice, I have the power. I used to love the old He-Man. However, it has not aged well, okay? I was bored one time, and I went on YouTube, and I tried to watch kind of the rerun of the old shows, and it was not as good as I remembered it. Although I was a big fan of the movie in the 80s. It's really bad, but it's one of those movies that's fun to watch. The one with Dolph Lundgren, the Masters of the Universe. I really enjoyed that one. So Asteric, sorry, got sidetracked there because the image made me think of it. Asteric says, pardon, let me take a drink of water real quick. Asteric asks, what are the standards that justify a belief? Well, it's very important that we define our terms. And again, it depends what you mean by justification. If we mean that justification is providing kind of a sufficient reason or evidence for a belief, well, the standards of evidence will include a number of things, one of which you need a worldview that provides the intelligibility of the very concept of evidence. So at the very base, when you are justifying a belief, you need to justify it within the context of a worldview that can make sense out of justification itself. And so I would argue that a necessary presupposition and standard is that the context in which a justification is offered, it is done within a context of a coherent worldview. So I would say that there needs to be truth, there needs to be logic, and there needs to be a worldview that can make sense out of those very standards that we use to make justificatory statements as we're trying to defend arguments and things like that. Now, if you're not dealing with a worldview issue and you're kind of just making an argument, yeah, on a general level, you can list certain standards like logic, intelligibility without having to provide the worldview details for that. But when we're dealing with, say, like Christianity versus atheism or Christianity and some other worldview, then the discussion is going to be broader, and we're going to be asking those foundational questions. What are the necessary preconditions for justification itself? And that, I would get into the standards would be having a coherent worldview that can provide a foundation for knowledge, truth, logic, intelligible experience, things like that. Okay? Thank you for your question there, Asarak. I apologize if I've mispronounced it. Chris Lasala says Molina was a joke. I wouldn't be down on Molina. I obviously am not a Molinist, and I disagree with Roman Catholicism. Molina was a Jesuit, but he was no schlup. He was actually a very brilliant mind. I actually read an excellent book. Let me see if I can find it here real quick. Give me 1 second. It's here somewhere. Let's see here. I have a book. There we go. There we go. I'm going to give some love to my... I agree with the philosopher Guillaume Bignon, who is also a friend of mine. He's been on the show a couple of times. He says that Molinism is his favorite of the false views. Okay, so out of all the options that you have, like Arminianism, Calvinism, Molinism, Guillaume said that Molinism was his favorite of the false views. I don't think that he was a schlup. I don't think he was a joke. I do think that he did present things that really needed to be responded to. And I think there are ways to respond to it. But here's a great book if folks are interested in Louis de Molina. This book, Louis de Molina, was written by Kirk McGregor, who is a fine scholar and theologian. I think he is at McPherson College. And he wrote this book. It's a biography of Molina, but also goes into the details of Molina's views on various things. And let me see here. Let me see if I could find it. There is a chapter specifically. I mean, when I was studying Molinism, I was marking, I don't know if you could see it, I was marking this book up like nobody's business. I think that he was brilliant in one sense, but ultimately, obviously, I don't agree with the philosophy that undergirded a lot of what he said, and I don't agree with the motivation behind why he developed his theory of middle knowledge and so forth. And so folks can check that out on my channel. I've offered my criticisms of Molinism in various places, in various contexts. I think one way that I think is useful to address Molinism, a lot of people tend to focus on what's called the grounding objection. But I actually think that what is a more fruitful way of critiquing Molinism and showing that there's problems is actually critiquing the very concept of libertarian freedom. And so there are ways to go about that I'm not going to get into here, but I'm thinking of doing a live stream on that very specific topic. So I don't think he was a joke. I don't know what you mean by that. I mean, I think he was a very brilliant guy, but, you know, you could be brilliant and wrong. So there you go. Those are my thoughts there. Did I have Skeletor's Castle? I had Castle Grayskull. Someone had donated it from my church, and I had the whole set with all the figures. It was awesome. They just don't make toys like that anymore. Golly. All right, let's see here. Frank says, I suppose the folks saying you're being disingenuous are assuming the Christian worldview by assuming thou shalt not lie. Well, I guess, yeah. If I'm being disingenuous, by what standard should we care or think I'm wrong by being disingenuous? All right, that's a good question. Yeah. Let's see here. Okay, Chris Lasala says, talking about Louis de Molina, was his motivation not to make God like man rather than just believe the plain text? Well, I'd be very careful when you say believe the plain text. Okay, no one simply believes the plain text. I mean, texts have to be interpreted. Okay. Now, I do believe that there are texts that are quote unquote straightforward, but everything is going to be determined by the context. And of course, I don't agree with Molina's take on how he interpreted various scriptures that he thought supported his position. But I don't think his motivation was that. I think he genuinely wanted to try and reconcile a very tough philosophical question, and he also wanted to respond to the reformers. Okay, because he was a Jesuit. Jesuits were anti-reformers. They were contrary to there was a counter-reformation that was spearheaded by the Jesuits. So I think his motivation is more in line of that. He wasn't trying to, what does it say? He says, was his motivation not to make God like man rather than just believe? I'm not sure what you're saying. I hope I answered that somewhat. Sorry if that didn't make sense. Let's see here. Jonathan Myron says, is it okay for Christians to join the military? I've been thinking about enlisting. Oh boy. Well, don't take my word. I mean, I don't think there's anything sinful about joining the military. I mean, David was a military man, right? But does that mean you should join the military? Like, well, I can't speak to that. I don't want to give you, advice that will lead you to make such an important decision. Well, all I can say is there's nothing intrinsically sinful about joining the military. There might be other factors that you need to weigh and consider. That's a very big deal to make that decision. So that's all I can say about that. All right. I found I sound like Forrest Gump. That's all I've got to say about that. Apologetics says, isn't William Lane Craig a nominalist? How would people with that stance make sense of the laws of logic? Well, that's a great question. I think nominalism, by the way, is a position that rejects universals, okay? And that all that exist are particulars, and things that we call universals they're just names. We give them names. They're not actually existent things. So yeah, I would have a problem with that. I think there are universals, and I wouldn't know how they would make sense out of the laws of logic in a meaningful way. So I think that would be a criticism on my part with respect to someone who rejects the concept of universals. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Well, I think I got everybody. I apologize if I missed anyone. All right. We're on the top of the hour, and that's all I've got here. I appreciate you guys taking the time and listening to what I have to say. If you like the content, please subscribe if you haven't. Share the content if you think someone else would find it useful. And I'm going to be live next, what's today's Thursday? Next Tuesday with a response to Jacob Brunton. Okay? Jacob Brunton is a gentleman who is not a big fan of presuppositionalism, and he made that tweet saying that presuppositionalism was immoral. And so I provided a response to each of his points. And then on Twitter, he provided a brief response to me, and I'm going to offer a response back. Now, I'm going to end it there. I don't intend to kind of just go back and forth forever. But he was nice and respectful in terms of what he offered by way of response. And so I'm just going to offer my rebuttal of his point, and then we'll leave things as it stands, as I don't want to get into any unnecessary prolonged interaction. That's the worst, right? And it's like, look, I responds, you respond, it goes back, it can go on forever. So I will do it in as much as it's useful for people who are wondering about how one might respond to some of the points he brings up. And so I will play a brief video of him providing a response to what I did, and then I'll interact with it a little bit. And that's the plan for Tuesday. All right. Well, that's it for this live stream, guys. Thank you so much for listening in. Whether you're a Christian or non-Christian, I appreciate you being respectful in the comments, and just appreciate your questions. Thank you so much. Until next time, take care. God bless. Bye-bye.